Hi, I'm Garland Favorito. I'm back with John Ainsworth of America's Remedy, and we're about to discuss what I think is one of the most important historical facts that have been suppressed for our lifetimes. And it has to do with what we talked about at the last segment. It was the political overthrow of America. So, John, tell us a little bit about that and what happened.
Well, this is one of the important things with the American Civil War is we're taught in our schools, our children are taught, most of us were taught that the war, we're taught to look at that period of time from a moral perspective rather than a political perspective, you know. And so a lot of people give the statement, well, you know, the ends justify the means if it was a moral war. But what we're about, you know, it really wasn't about slavery. It was about the political overthrow. So it was really a political thing. And now we have to look at, does the ends justify the means? Originally, this nation was a federal union. Every state had its sovereignty. They were considered like independent countries. They could vote themselves in and out of the union as they did from the Articles to the Constitution. And they had individual body politics, individual political bodies. Like North Carolina had a political body, Georgia had a political body, New York had a political body, and they were all independent. And so the political overthrow we had was the nationalization, is getting rid of all those political bodies, getting rid of all state political bodies and make them one people, which is the United States citizenship aspect. And it nationalized citizenship. And as we talked about in the previous segment, if you could nationalize citizenship, take us from a federal union to a national union, then all power would be centralized in Washington, which is what we have today. And so what we had with it wasn't considered the object of the war. This is what Reconstruction did. Reconstruction nationalized citizenship and actually subjugated all the northern states to Washington.
And tell us, John, a little bit about how that took place, this nationalization.
Well, the Reconstruction Acts were passed in 1867. They were proposed in 1866. Now, here's one of the lies or one of the deceptions that we're taught about the Reconstruction Acts. We're taught that they were actually passed to give the recently freed blacks civil rights and make them on equal footing with the citizens of the several states. But I say what the Reconstruction Acts were about were to nationalize citizenship and make everyone subject to Congress. Okay? And to prove that point, I've got some quotes from some of the people of the time. And here's an individual by the name of James G. Blaine. James G. Blaine was an actual representative, a congressman. And he wrote this. He wrote a speech to his constituents in August of 1866. The 14th Amendment, which nationalized citizenship, was proposed in June of 1866. So it was just a couple months later. And he says this. He says, "And in making this extension of citizenship, we are not confining the breadth and scope of our efforts to the Negro. It is for the white man as well. We intend to make citizenship national." So this is a political overthrow. This is changing the body politics. You know, it's an absolute political overthrow of what our founders put into place, which we're feeling the repercussions of today.
And John, isn't the fact that the most of the southern states passed the 13th Amendment but refused to pass the 14th Amendment that you're talking about?
Well, that's true. They all passed the 13th Amendment abolishing slavery. The 14th Amendment, only one of the former southern states ratified. It was pretty much under coercion. That was Tennessee. And when Reconstruction was implemented, and if you read the words of the Reconstruction Acts, you see the total purpose of the Reconstruction Acts is to pass the 14th Amendment. And so when you look at, well, who was the Reconstruction Act imposed upon? Was it imposed on all of the former Confederate states? No, Tennessee was exempted because they had ratified the 14th Amendment. So they weren't reconstructed. And so we've got to look at the Reconstruction Acts not as what we're taught, that, oh, these were the acts that allowed the states to come back into the Union, allowed to make them do things that would allow them to come back in the Unions. The Reconstruction Act's the sole purpose was to pass the 14th Amendment, which nationalized citizenship and centralized all power in Washington. It changed, it just, think of the political structure of America being fundamentally in all the states, and you got now 50 political bodies, and what the Reconstruction Act did was blend them all together and put all power in Washington. We no longer have it in the states. anymore.
And that is why I guess both the southern states opposed it, and even some northern states opposed that as well, correct?
Yeah, most northern states oppose it. I mean, you look at, I believe it was Ohio and New Jersey, they kind of got caught up in passing it and ratifying it, then they withdrew it. And I don't know of many states that have ever withdrawn their consent after giving consent that we consent to adopting this amendment. But several of the northern states actually reversed and said, no, we want out of this. And they could not get enough of the northern states involved to pass it without having these southern states doing it,
so
being coerced to do it.
So then there was so much opposition to that 14th Amendment. Why was it? How did it get passed?
Well, that's what the Reconstruction Acts are. And let me go to one of my Reconstruction Acts. I'm actually going to read from the Reconstruction Acts right now.
Good.
And the Reconstruction Acts were passed on March 2nd, 1867. And what we've got here is the very first sentence of the Reconstruction Act says this. It says, whereas no legal state governments or adequate protection for life or property now exist in the rebel states, and it lists them all with the exception of Tennessee. Well, this is a decree, and what Congress is doing with the first sentence of the Reconstruction Act is just decreeing that there's no lawful state body politics in these states by decree. You know, and they're being punished. The people are being punished. They're losing their political status as state citizens. And it's all without due process of law. And this is called a bill of attainder. This is actually a bill of attainder, which is forbidden in the Constitution. And so that's the opening sentence is a bill of attainder, is what the Reconstruction Act, which is a crime. But if you go to Section 5, what Section 5 says is these states have been basically reduced to territories. And now it changes who can vote. Basically anyone in the United States living in those states who didn't participate in the rebellion, because if you participated in the rebellion, you were not a part of this new body politic. The Reconstruction Acts were designed to give citizens loyal to this nationalist overthrow a form of government. They were the new political body. So it's only people loyal to this nationalist concept. This is the body politic for them, and they're going to become U.S. citizens. But it says this is in Section 5, it says, when said state, this loyal state, by a vote of its legislature, elected under said Constitution, this new one that they created, shall have adopted the amendment to the Constitution of the United States proposed by the 39th Congress and known as Article 14, the 14th Amendment, and when such article shall have become part of the Constitution of the United States, said state shall be declared entitled to representation in Congress and senators and representatives. Okay, so what you've got here is what the Reconstruction Acts did was it forced the passage. It says these new states, these nationalist states, they are required to bring the 14th Amendment up, and they are required to pass it. And not only that, it's required to become part of the national Constitution before they can actually seat senators and representatives. It's an absolutely coerced legislation. And what we want to do is this unconstitutional? Is this unconstitutional? Well, in the Constitution, I believe it's the Article 5, is how you amend the Constitution. And nowhere does it say, well, if you want to amend the Constitution, if you want to get an amendment passed, you find a group that didn't ratify it, you just annul them, reduce them to a territory, change the people who like that concept, and then say, okay, this group of people gets to amend the Constitution. This is not in the amendment process of the Constitution. This is unconstitutional.
So the representation, of course, is decided by the Constitution, and it cannot be overridden by a legislative act, as you're saying.
Right.
So, John, one last question. You mentioned that the northern states also suffered a rights loss, as well as the southern states from this. Would you want to comment on that?
Yeah, this goes back a little bit to what we were talking about earlier about, was it a war between the states? You know, the North won. Well, if you go to what the results of the war are, which is this, the Reconstruction Acts are the crowning glory of Congress of how to change this union politically, then, and you look at what happened to New York, where you're going to find as soon as the 14th Amendment passed, which says all persons born or naturalized in the United States and subject to the jurisdiction thereof are citizens of the United States. That's the national status. You have to go to New York, go to Wisconsin. who could vote? Who was the political body in New York before the Civil War? And you're going to find it's the freemen of New York or the freemen of Wisconsin. Okay, that's when they were individual sovereign states with their individual sovereign citizens as a body. And then you say, well, who can vote in New York, Wisconsin now? Well, only United States citizens residing there, only national citizens. And you see a political overthrow. We went from a union of states, a federal union, which the Constitution was designed to a nation of one people, United States citizens. It was a political overthrow of everything our founders put into place.
And this was all achieved with an unconstitutional act, as we can see here. So when we come back, North Carolina has implemented some solutions to get around the unconstitutionality of this act and how to put in place some more freedom for their citizens. And we'll talk about that in our next segment.